Chapter 1. Welcome to Wolf Camp. You have a 42% chance of survival. Please take your orientation packet and head directly to your cabin. The kid stood in the doorway like a deer in the headlights. Tattoos marbled his skin while a deflated army surplus duffel bag hung over one shoulder. Took a second for Becca's words to sink in. Then predictably he turned on his heel to flee the premises and crashed chest first into me. Perhaps you could tone down the welcome, I suggested to my cousin. Just saying it the way I see it, Luke. Well, start seeing it differently. Despite our banter, my eyes never left the kid. I did, however, take a single step backwards so I could take in the entirety of his form. He was early 20s, I guessed. Older than usual. And where's Mommy? His eyes squinted half shut. The scent of wolf flashed from his pores. If I didn't get out of his way fast, he would shift and tear into me like half a dozen others had before him. I cocked my head. A wolf tussle could be fun, but that wasn't what this kid needed right now. Because Tattoo Kid was scrawny, his bones having outgrown the flesh atop them. He smelled faintly of fast food bathroom antibacterial soap, as if he'd washed up as best he could at the McDonald's 3 miles down the road in lieu of an actual shower. Beneath the tattoos, his skin was the sickly pale of a couch potato, or of a shifter who'd spent the last many moons in the form of his wolf. No, this wasn't a run-of-the-mill camper, which meant behind me, a gust of wind informed me that the building's main door had opened. Chattering voices drifted down the hall. Well, honey, I wish we could. The mother. I can't believe you listened to him. The son. The youngster's scent was full of furry confusion. A typical wolf camper scent. To me, because his pack couldn't handle his strength. To most alpha werewolves, a single sniff of the incoming camper would have been enough to get their territorial motors revving. To my surprise, Tattoo Kid's mouth quirked upward into the barest hint of a smile. Oh. Yeah. Oh, I answered. It was nice to be understood. But Tattoo Kid needed to get out of here ASAP. Our operation wasn't exactly set up for walk-in guests. The thing was, wolf campers weren't allowed in each other's vicinity for the first 24 hours. We staggered their arrivals, locked them in their cabins, went to crazy extremes to keep their testosterone hazes out of each other's face. Because unplanned sightings tended to lead to fights. Fights led to injuries. Injuries led to mortalities. I might call this place Wolf Camp, but it was intended to be the campers' salvation. Tattoo Kid would derail that intention if we didn't get him out of here immediately. Unfortunately, the office had only one door. Chapter 2. Footsteps drew closer. A clatter of high heels. A thud squeak of brand new high-end sneakers. That was the expected camper. Tattoo Kid, in contrast, wasn't on the roster. 30 more seconds in this would turn into a shit show. This isn't what I expected. Tattoo Kid let the duffel slide off his shoulder. A human dropping his bag would have been letting down his guard, making himself comfortable. The werewolf before me, in contrast, was preparing himself for offensive action. And no wonder. Sneaker Boy was close enough so his reek of alpha aggression almost yanked my wolf to the forefront. I trained myself to resist Lupin instinct, so the urge was just a tickling in the back of my throat. Tattoo Kid had no such defense. I clenched my fists, hating what I had to do next. But it was all part of the package. Some I could save, some I could not. I offered Tattoo Kid one final sliver of hope. You are on Wolf Camp land, I warned, gaze never wavering. Last chance. The tone of my voice should have slapped him into submission. But Tattoo Kid didn't blink or look away. His wolf was nowhere near ready to submit to mine. His human half, on the other hand, was surprisingly cognizant of the repercussions of gainsaying the owner of Wolf Camp. Meaning you can kill me now and no one will bat an eyelash. A grunt from Sneaker Boy. Mom, did you hear that? I don't want. I ignored the youngster even as his voice hit the squeaky soprano of a terrified teenager. I could lay him flat on his back without breaking a sweat. Zip-tie him and send him home with his mommy in 30 seconds or less. Maybe if the camper didn't actually start the session before washing out, the usual wouldn't happen. Maybe his daddy would give him a second chance rather than snapping his toothpick neck. While I pondered, Tattoo Kid was sprouting fur in the usual places. Under his chin, the better to protect himself from the expected death blow. Between his fingers as claws sprouted in an effort to defend himself. I couldn't see it, but there would also be a haze of fluff running the length of his spine, under his arms, between his legs. Tattoo Kid was more than half Lupin already. He wouldn't survive 24 hours locked in a cabin-turned-cell. On the other hand, if Tattoo Kid shifted in the confines of our office, Sneaker Boy wouldn't be able to help himself from joining in a brawl. 2 dead kids or 1. That was my decision. My stomach sank. But Tattoo Kid surprised me. His fingers hooked themselves around the duffel bag strap even though they were almost paws already. He stepped closer to Becca and further from the youngster who now stunk of fury and fur. Then Tattoo Kid picked up a wooden chair. And for the first time I grew worried. We hadn't suffered through a hostage situation since our second season. Becca was one tough cookie, but she was seated and entirely human. Tattoo Kid outweighed her by at least 50 pounds. He didn't make a move toward my favorite family member, however. Instead, still not breaking our eye lock, he made me a promise. I'll be back in 24 hours. The window shattered as the chair crashed through it. Then Tattoo Kid defenestrated himself. Chapter 3. Defenestration means throwing something out a window, Becca complained. 23 3/4 hours later. We'd been up all night, alternately browbeating me and sugarcoating Becca the campers. In 15 minutes we'd let all 12 out of their cabins and hoped they didn't kill each other over lunch. My cousin, predictably, was more interested in debating semantics. You can't defenestrate yourself, she continued. I shrug. I say it the way I see it. Luke. Becca. Well, either way, he's long gone now. Becca dug her bare foot into the dust. At the edge of the driveway, 1 big circle, 2 dots for eyes, then a turned down frowny mouth. My cousin was too soft-hearted for this gig, but she did it anyway. And not for the money either. Although that part was pretty good. We got 20 grand ahead up front, and there was no money-back guarantee to cut into our earnings if we sent campers home in a box. Luke, you know you've atoned for enough. No, we need to talk about this. It's been a decade. It wasn't your fault in the first place. And even if it had been, your brother's death is washed out, bleached away, air-dried. Becca. For once in your life, shut up and listen. She turned on me, eyes so fiery I half expected the cotton of my shirt to start smoking. The campers thought Becca was the good cop, but by the end of the month they would see her like this and reassess their assumptions. The preview was enough to make me forget, for a single second, why I'd interrupted her incipient tirade. You're not a lone wolf, she continued. You're an alpha protector. I see it. Every summer, you build packs, for crying out loud. Choose one and lead it. You have land, good standing in the shifter community. You could hold your own easily. Don't keep doing this to yourself. Am I the one who needs a pack? Or are you? She growled, one of many traits she'd picked up while spending summers among werewolves. At 15, when her lack of fur cut off further pack connection, she'd already cemented a slew of characteristics that were decidedly wolf. I'm human, Becca said, rebutting both my words and my thought processes. Physically, maybe. It's the only way that matters. No wolf pack will have me. Unfortunately, she was right. Stupid shifters, unable to look beneath the surface. Not for the first time, I wished I wasn't too broken to give my cousin what she both craved and deserved. We sat there in silence for one long moment. And even though a tingle at the back of my neck promised a predator was creeping toward us, I did my best to listen to what Becca was saying between the lines. I thought she was as committed to this task as I was, but instead I got the distinct impression her commitment was to me, not to the wolf campers. She craved a pack, and apparently I was it. Becca was bone-deep weary of watching 7 out of 12 kids die within the first week of making our acquaintance each season. She wanted out. And I'd trapped her here with my own unwillingness to give up on the atonement process. The issue would have to be dealt with soon, before the end of this round of wolf camp, but not at the present moment. Instead, I turned to face the dusty-pawed wolf lingering beneath the dining pavilion's awning. Welcome back to wolf camp, I told Tattoo Kid. 2 legs only for the next 24 hours. That's your first demerit. Third demerit in Chapter 4. That's shit. I'm not eating it. Alex, one of a dozen campers who'd been dragged here by their mamas, slammed the spoon down so hard it slopped burnt oatmeal onto Becca's apron. First. Demerit, I said just loudly enough so he could hear me from the other side of the room. Then I went back to watching the door. Tattoo Kid wasn't here yet. Lateness, I winced. A second demerit. I liked every camper to end their first day with a reason to read the rule packet they'd either ignored or lackadaisically flipped through during their 24-hour confinement. That meant I handed out first demerits like candy on Halloween. But second demerits were tricky. Second demerits meant campers I'd hoped to save were one step away from certain death. If the stars didn't align properly, I might have to snap their necks myself. So I tapped my foot and drifted closer to the only entrance. Fire codes weren't an issue here, crowd control was. Meanwhile, Becca was managing the oatmeal disdainer admirably, as usual. You just won the first round of kitchen duty, she said cheerfully. Then, presumably responding to something on Alex's face. If you spit in my vat of oatmeal, you'll eat this batch and nothing else until it's all gone. The other campers laughed. The inevitable round of heckling started. Immediately. You'll look good in a ruffled apron. Holly homemaker. Ooh, burn. Little did they know that KP duty was the best of the jobs they'd cycle through during the month ahead of them. Smirking only slightly, I was relieved to see Tattoo Kid finally making his way in through the door. Even though it wouldn't lessen his punishment, I could tell he had a good reason for being tardy. He'd spent the intervening minutes in a much-needed shower. His hair was slicked back and he walked with the contented grace of a recently licked house cat. The only factor marring his perfection was that same ratty duffel bag dropping dust onto his otherwise clean shirt. Lateness is a demerit, I informed him. He nodded, reaching for his back pocket. Here it came. The first overt display of disobedience, the example I'd have to make for the good of the eventual pack. But all that emerged was a sheaf of stapled papers folded to the final page, then coiled to fit into his pocket. Even from a distance I could see he'd marked an X rather than signing his name on what appeared to be a camp contract. You can't read. I raised my eyebrows. Could I call that extenuating circumstances? No, I decided. It was safer for everyone if rules remained rules. I read just fine. The abrupt silence in the room suggested the other campers had clued into our quiet drama, but no eyes weren't pointed in our direction. I slung around to face the food line, saw Becca with a splotch of spittle dripping down her cheek. My vision darkened around the edges as my wolf tried to rip its way out through my skin. Instead of succumbing to alpha anger, I pulled out my phone as I sprinted toward her. Where was it? Where was it? There. Good thing contacts arranged themselves alphabetically by a camper's first name. I dialed and dove between shocked shifters, coming up one table away from Alex and Becca just as Daddy Not So Dear replied. What? He's done. But I hung up. There was no time for external tantrums. Not when Becca was drawing her taser and preparing to fire. In her anger, she must have forgotten that Alex's questionnaire included the data that he had a superhuman pain tolerance. Shooting him now would be like a honeybee stinging the nose of a rampaging bull. Becca, back. I barked 1 second too late. The electrodes hit and were ripped free so fast I barely saw the motion. Yep, that bee sting had definitely awoken Alex's inner beast. But he wasn't Lupin when his hands went for her throat, which was bad news. For my cousin's safety, it meant my surefire method of stopping crazy shifters wasn't going to work. I had to try though. Freeze. Vital processes only. I ordered Alpha commandment, slapping 90% of the shifters in the room into instant obedience. But just as I'd expected, Alex was unaffected. His iron control over his wolf would have made him good alpha material if he wasn't about to die. Chapter 5. There was no time left for kid gloves, so I shifted as I leapt over the intervening table. Jeans slid off my hindquarters while my shirt slung sideways to twist around my furry neck. Ignoring the handicap, I struck Alex with the full weight of my body just as Becca's face went from the tint of cream of potato to tomato soup. We went down in a jumble of legs and fur, and it took me longer than it should. Have to realize I wasn't the only wolf in the pile. Tattoo Kid was there alongside me, brawling on camp property. His third demerit. It didn't matter that he was trying to save Becca. 3 strikes and you're out. At the moment, however, Becca's safety remained my top priority. Alex yelped. as my teeth bit into the tendons of his right wrist. The bone beneath was crunchy. His instinctive kick with his hind legs struck me straight in the gut. My teeth loosened without my permission just as the kid's unwounded hand tightened around Becca's tender human jugular. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't. Then abruptly Alex's fingers slackened. He was flat on his back, tattoo kid's teeth at his throat, before I even managed to regain my breath. Becca inhaled a great big gulp of air and my own chest expanded in sympathy. She lay there gasping while I stepped back stiff-legged. A wolf and a teenager struggled for dominance at my feet. The pair battled in complete silence. Tattoo Kid's teeth were too deeply embedded in Alex's throat for me to hear him growl. Alex's windpipe was too constricted for him to breathe. And to make matters worse, Alex's father's henchmen would be here at any minute. Executioners were, by definition, sick motherfuckers. If I was wiping the floor with recalcitrant campers when they arrived, well, they might take that as an excuse to slaughter everyone in the room. Perhaps that's why I didn't shift and disagree when Becca rose to tower above the two entwined campers. She swallowed twice, and when she spoke her voice was raspy. Alex's punishment is not your responsibility, she told Tattoo Kid. Fighting is your second demerit. Killing is an instant washout. No chances left to go for a third. Either my cousin couldn't count or she was lying. In wolf form, the latter possibility made no sense to me. I cocked my head, whined out a question. Then two big burly thugs pressed in through. Chapter 6. Bad timing had turned into worse timing. Tattoo Kid would never manage to back down from the aggression pouring off the newcomer's skin. My cousin, of course, seemed intent upon giving him the breathing space to at least try. Gentlemen, a moment please. Becca slipped past us so fast she might as well have been Lupin. Her hands pressed against overmuscled chests. Her feminine humanity was the only factor preventing the executioners from ripping her to shreds. And I took advantage of the eddying emotional currents to follow her lead as well as I could, wrenching myself back into my two-legger skin. The undertow drew Tattoo Kid up right alongside me. His human teeth scratched Alex's neck. As I dragged the two apart with human fingers, Tattoo Kid's whine emerged from furless lips, even though the emotion he expressed was entirely wolf. Not your problem, I assured Tattoo Kid as Alex took advantage of the moment to try to rise off the linoleum. My foot struck the latter's throat. Alex subsided with a gurgle of pain. Becca was talking, but I wasn't listening. Instead, my entire attention was focused on the boring of eyes between my shoulder blades. Alex's father's henchmen were hungry for blood. Mine, Tattoo Kid's, Alex's, it didn't matter. Inside my skin, my wolf bristled. Beside me, Tattoo Kid growled low and quiet, deep in his throat. Let them step up and take him. He's not yours. He's mine. I wasn't lying. Every kid who entered wolf camp territory became my temporary packmate. It was my trick for managing the unmanageable. Usually I relinquished that connection before washouts were executed. This time for Tattoo Kid's sake, I instead held tight to the tether twining between myself and Alex as the henchman stomped past us and yanked the teenager to his feet. Past the end of the driveway, I told them as they dragged a whimpering washout back in the direction from which they'd come. No need for the campers to hear this execution. Only after their vehicle doors slammed shut did I reach down to pull Tattoo Kid to his feet. What's your name? I wasn't making conversation. My wolf was too dominant inside my body to succumb to such human irrelevancies. Instead, I was giving Tattoo Kid a moment to pull himself together before I released the rest of the campers from the order that held them frozen with spoons in their hands and oatmeal in their mouths. Unfortunately, Tattoo Kid didn't play along. Call me whatever you want to. He shrugged, turning away in a gesture that was insolent enough to earn another demerit. But I didn't give him one and he knew I wouldn't. This was the trouble with making exceptions. Laxness on my part opened the door to bad behavior of this sort. Becca sighed, a soft sound of disappointment. We both knew we were going to lose a second camper today. And with no father in the wings, I'd have to perform this execution. Only Tattoo Kid wasn't giving me the body language equivalent of the middle finger. Instead, he swiveled back to face me with that ratty old duffel swinging from one finger. He dropped it at my feet like a well-trained dog returning a thrown tennis ball. I don't intend to be a charity case, he said, voice gritty. I held out my hand's palm up in question. It was hard to hold on to the plot. Lying here in the cafeteria when I could feel Alex's fear ratchet up from worry to terror in the distance. He and his pack mates had reached the killing ground. Through the washout snows I smelled blood, feces, and urine. Even after 11 months the kill site stunk. 20 grand is still the price of admission, right? Tattoo Kid wasn't letting the matter drop. Instead he appended the duffel, releasing a cascade of $20 bills that fluttered down to form a pile completely covering my bare feet. I blinked. Did you rob a bank?
No.
He didn't elaborate, but the oversight wasn't due to surliness. Pain ripped through me as my connection to Alex tightened. And from the expression on Tattoo Kid's face, the same agony had slammed into his belly as well. Alex didn't die easy. He struggled, I could feel it. He whined and begged and was torn to shreds with a complete lack of dignity. And Tattoo Kid rode that wave right alongside me. He'd bonded with that asswipe Alex just like I had. He felt the moment when men Alex had once trusted ended his life. Tattoo Kid coughed once, then shoulders that had bowed down in protest straightened. My own body mirrored his reaction minus the cough. Our conversation continued. The hiccup finished but not forgotten. For the sake of the campers I held my voice steady. You don't owe me anything. I'm paying for the chance of a pack. His tone matched mine beat for beat. This has nothing to do with you. The room exhaled even though I hadn't released my long ago order. Instead, Tattoo Kid did the job for me with pure intent. And for the first time all day I smiled. A new alpha was being born. Chapter 7. Looking back on it, the next 3 weeks merged into a movie montage scene, complete with upbeat soundtrack and occasional laugh lines. There was the day I took the campers hunting box turtles to be radio-tracked by scientists. In wolf form, of course. Matthew, a scrawny bloodling scared of his own strength, refused to pick up the shelled reptiles until Tattoo Kid led the way with such gentle wisdom that he cemented Matthew's loyalty for good. There was the teenager nicknamed Nose, who was the epitome of awkwardness in human form but whose sense of smell beat everyone else's in the pack during our first group run. He wouldn't be their leader, but everyone wanted him to survive wolf camp. Even our resident bully Gregory resisted the urge to kick Nose's ass. The rest of the campers had their own stories and characteristics, some of which were lost forever as the timbre of the montage darkened. After the first week, Becca and I stopped locking campers into their cabins at dusk and 3 kids died within the next 24 hours. The first 2 were disemboweled in their sleep. The killer was executed at dawn. During the 3rd week, a promising shifter perished due to bee sting allergies. That one was unexpected. More predictable was the camper Sneaker Boy, who broke 3 rules in quick succession and had to be put down by his father's enforcers. By the end of week 3, there were only 8 campers remaining. Tattoo Kid, Timid Matthew, Nose, Gregory the Bully, his henchmen Liam and Elijah, and 2 shifters I couldn't quite get a handle on, Oliver and Aiden. We gathered in the gazebo after breakfast, the lines around Becca's mouth tightening as I informed the survivors about what would happen during their final week of camp. Now's your chance to get a head start over every other dumbass kid who went through this program, I started. The rustling and whispering stilled as they realized my words would affect the rest of their lives, long or short. 1 of you is the clear alpha. Unanimously choose him here and now, and I'll return a quarter of your tuition fee. That's enough to buy an acreage and create a sweet territory. Everybody wins. A snort from the crowd was Becca's cue to take on her role as good cop. You kids don't know what you're missing out on. She was so earnest, ignoring the eye rolls and yawns from Gregory's side of the gazebo. 3 summers ago the pack took us up on our offer. They bought a plot out west where land is cheap, and our paperwork gave them a year of leeway before they had to defend their territory from other packs. Now most of them have mates. They're thriving. Plus, I took off to the beach for a week of vacation. She placed a hand over her heart. True bliss. Aiden chuckled at her theatrics, but the 2 alpha contenders had been paying more attention to the details. Gregory rose to his feet, straightening until he was 1 inch taller than everyone else in the vicinity. I nominate myself. And so much for that. No beach vacation this session. Instead, we could expect at least 1 more death. I wasn't the only shifter disappointed. Matthew, sweet kid but dumb as a Rock opened his mouth to reject Gregory's leadership, and Tattoo Kid spoke over him, painting the target on his own back instead.
No.
Look, Gregory started. I'm the obvious choice. I have family connections. Money. Arrogance? Not a selling point. Tattoo Kid met Gregory's stare for one split second, then dismissed him with a chin jerk at me. Regaining the floor, I drew the camper's attention away from the drama of the truncated power struggle. Well, bozos, you just lost your best bet at survival. So here are the new rules. Don't leave Wolf Camp property or you'll regret it. No guns. And consequences for bothering Becca increase from this moment forward. Touch a hair on her head or make her shed a single tear and you're out. No shivered. By this point they all knew what out meant. Otherwise, I continued, the rules are no rules. No cash payout, but I'll sign off on your pack if you unanimously choose an alpha by the end of the week. Questions. So can we, kill each other? Matthew's brow furrowed. My lips quirked. He'd given me just the opening I was waiting for. Each other. Yes. Or me. That's a yes also. Ears pricked up even though none of the campers were currently looped in. Everyone was paying attention when I planted the bait. Wolf Camp is set up as a trust, not a personal possession, I informed them. If I die, this year's campers inherit the land, the cash, everything. Major stepping stone to success, guys. I slid my gaze across the 8 remaining shifters. Tattoo Kid met my eyes. Matthew was red-faced, as if he'd been the one who turned this into Luke. Hunting season. Most of the others looked befuddled, sick to their stomachs, or outright lost. But Gregory smiled wide and toothy. Bait sniffed out and accepted. At least part of the morning had been a success. Chapter 8. I wish you wouldn't do that. Becca and I were back where we'd started, sitting on the porch killing time, while campers made decisions they'd later regret. I shrug. Better they go after me than each other. Gives Tattoo Kid a couple of days to find his feet. You could just shorten No Rules Week. Becca glowered at her toenails. She was drawing in the dust again, but I couldn't tell what the picture was at the moment. Spend more time on Wolf Week. Now that's an idea worth expanding upon. Wouldn't work. I shook my head, then reached out and snagged the arrow, speeding toward me out of the woods. Grab and twist, making sure the point ended up far from Becca so it wouldn't scratch her accidentally. Becca yipped only a little. My fingers stung from the friction. Still, I didn't show any sign of weakness as I called into the forest. Nice try, but you'll have to do better than that. A growl of frustration followed by a rustle of feet on fallen leaves promised. Elijah had retreated. Becca and I sat in silence for a moment longer. Smart pack started with a decoy, then planned a second strike while their prey was recovering its wits. Gregory's pack was apparently not that smart. When the cicadas restarted their chorus, Becca returned to her point. Why not? Because they need to get aggression out of their systems in a safe setting. Then they need to realize the deadline is crazy close. Pressure, terror, is what builds a cohesive pack. Becca sighed. Sometimes you're so wolf it drives me crazy. Sometimes I'm glad you're really not. I meant my words, but I was only half paying attention to our conversation. Because, belatedly, I deciphered the picture at my cousin's feet. The central blob was a house, I realized. Out front a stick family stood. Together under a shade tree, mother, father, kid, dog. Or was that a wolf? The truth hit me like a blow to the head. Becca yearned for Lupin. Togetherness. No wonder she'd never made any real connections in the mundane human world. Selfishly, I'd let her come to Wolf Camp September after September. I'd used her as a crutch, explaining away her presence as a teaching tool for the campers. She was a physical embodiment of the most important rule of pack dynamics: the strong protected those without fangs or the ability to bite back. So, yeah, my reasoning had made sense at the time. But Becca was putting her life on hold, hoping she and I could become permanent pack mates. Meanwhile, I'd lost all faith in pack when my father killed my brother in retaliation for a half-assed teenaged rebellion. I couldn't commit to another wolf clan. Not now. Not so soon. Which meant it was high time to stop deluding myself. It was time to follow my own advice. Be strong and protect Becca from her own misplaced instincts. Without Wolf Camp, my cousin could find a human husband, buy a house, pop out a kid, adopt a dog. The picture in the dust would be a pipe dream no longer. The fact I wouldn't be part of it was beside the point. I swallowed, then proceeded to fix my mistake. We don't need you here. What? For a moment, it seemed as if she couldn't understand what I was saying, so I elaborated. You're a liability. A liability? Her voice, which had been nearly steady in the face of the steel-tipped arrow, rose to the pitch of a teakettle's shriek. A head popped out of the nearest cabin. I bared my teeth, growled, waited, until the looky-loo bolted back inside. Playing on others' emotions for their own future safety was what I did best. I just never used my skills against Becca before this point. That had to be why my stomach ached as if I'd eaten day-old roadkill then. Returned to human form before the rancid meat had time to digest. Ignoring the pain, I looked her dead in the eye. A kitten would do your job better. You plan to replace me with a kitten? Becca was on her feet now. The last time she'd been so angry, we'd both been 5 and I'd popped the head off her plastic doll and sunk it in the muddy lake bottom. She tried to claw my eyes out. I'd free dove for hours until I found the missing piece. Now grown up, I still quailed beneath her fury. Quailing involved blinking 3 times in quick succession before speaking. So, are you leaving? No, you infuriating man, I'm not leaving. Any other woman would have slapped me. Instead, she called my bluff. I'll see this season out. Then we'll talk. Chapter 9. For 3 days, Wolf Camp was a maelstrom of fury. Tattoo Kid made himself scarce while at the same time showing up anytime a weaker wolf found himself in danger. Gregory and his henchmen threw their full focus behind trying to kill me. Becca's eyes joined in with the latter task while the rest of her bodyguarded my back. I'd really prefer you didn't protect me, I said through gritted teeth when Becca interposed herself between a stampeding werewolf and my waiting fingers. I planned to toss the kid over my shoulder into a hornet's nest. Liam would have gotten the message in a dozen different stinging ways. Now he'd just try again tonight. I sighed. I hadn't planned on sleeping. Anyway, packmates protect each other, Becca answered. Then under her breath, even when one of them is a backstabbing jerk. I shrugged, heading toward the center of camp where I'd be an easier target. If I could keep Gregory's attention on me for another day or two, I had a feeling Tattoo Kid would win the fence-sitters over to his side. 5 against 3 was bad odds among werewolves. The mismatch might be enough to make Gregory cave. Unfortunately, time ran out quicker than I'd anticipated. And Gregory was more underhanded than any other camper I'd met during the last decade. Or so I realized when I re-entered the cabin complex and scented vomit. Turned nostrils flaring. The stench didn't just emanate from one cabin but rather from several. All, in fact, except the dens of Gregory and his 2 henchmen. What is it? This time, Becca stepped closer to me for her own comfort. As usual, she'd bonded with these campers. She was worried, not for herself but for the safety of the kids. Her shoulder nudged against my arm, and I wanted to pull her in close and reassure her the way a wolf would have done. Instead, I took a half step sideways, my hand falling to the taser belted at my hip. Lock yourself in the office and don't come out until I tell you, I ordered. Don't eat or drink anything. She snorted, a short huff of air out of delicate nostrils. Whatever. You're saying it's poison. I'm saying I need to buy an obedient kitten. Yeah, because everyone knows it's so easy hurting cats. Becca reached the closest door before I could stop her. I hesitated, uncertain whether to stand behind her or walk before her. Was the greatest danger outside or in? Outside. I turned as a flicker in my peripheral vision materialized into Gregory. No, not just Gregory. Gregory, Liam, and Elijah, all 3 assholes in a single location. What a coincidence. It's time to decide, the central asshole proclaimed loudly enough to be heard over the sound of retching. My way or the die way. He chuckled. Get it? Die way. Dutifully, Liam and Elijah laughed. Come on. Crawl out of there. Gregory's command was barely enough to send the weakest wolf scurrying to obey him. Nose emerged from the cabin door Becca had been about to open, vomit staining his fur. He pressed past us, swaying as he made his way toward the stronger werewolf. I stepped between him and Becca. This moment the youngster was no more than a puppet on a string. But Gregory didn't take advantage of the opportunity to harm my cousin. Instead, he continued talking while turning in a circle so his voice invaded all the cabins. Come out and choose me as your alpha. Then I'll dole out the antidote. He raised his hand high. A glass bottle glinted in the sunlight. I could shift to wolf form and grab it. But to do so I'd have to leave. Becca sighed. Would she be safe if I shoved her into Nose's cabin and locked the door behind her? Or would she come right back out and dive into the battle I intended to start? While I debated, Tattoo Kid made my decision for me. I'd been wrong. His cabin didn't smell of vomit. Instead, it had a four-legged werewolf standing on its roof. Tattoo Kid had no cousin to protect, and no compunction against killing either. So he didn't warn or posture, gave no request for explanation or time in which to beg. Instead, he fell from above and bowled his opponents over while they were still gloating. His teeth were at the assholes' throats one after another. Chomp, chomp, chomp. Gregory, Liam, and Elijah were dead before they hit. Chapter 10. I don't want to be an alpha. That wasn't my plan. This time Tattoo Kid and I were the ones sitting on the porch digging our feet into the dust at the edge of the driveway. We doled out the antidote and seen immediate improvement in the poison shifters. Becca was treating the recuperating campers with cool washcloths on their foreheads and other useless shit that nonetheless made them feel loved, which meant it was time to do my job and come up with a similar placebo for Tattoo Kid's internal crisis. You came here to join a pack, I countered. Now you have one. Okay, so that was less of a sugar pill and more like tossing vinegar into his eyes. Nonetheless, Tattoo Kid accepted my answer like a man. Yeah. We sat in silence for several long minutes. Then out of nowhere the story he'd hugged to his chest for the last month came tumbling out. I was a wildling, he said, starting with what I'd guessed already. Wildling was a werewolf born in Lupin form whose parents left him in the woods to die. Sometimes against all odds they survived until they were old enough to shift into human form. But I wasn't alone, Tattoo Kid continued. An old man found me, raised me as his pet. He was a human hermit, lived off in the woods with just me and his garden. He hunted if he wanted meat. Then when he got sick I brought home deer and squirrels to strengthen him up. I hummed a Lupin sound of acknowledgement. Tattoo Kid smiled. He called me Prince. The reason Prince had never offered his name before was obvious. He didn't want to sully the memory of a connection as simple as it was profound. The rest of the story turned into a tearjerker. The man was old, ailing. Tattoo Kid Prince shifted to human form in time to bury his only pack mate. Over the course of the next year, he taught himself to read using books in the hermit's cabin. Gradually, he came to understand the existence of the larger world. The cash squirreled away in coffee cans was initially used for fire starting. Eventually, though, Prince learned about money and about wolf camp. So you didn't rob a bank? I told you that. Prince's eyes when they met mine were so naive that I worried for a moment he'd never make it as alpha. Then he grinned, shrugged, let the naivety fall away. Yeah, I might have let you believe otherwise. Good for the image. I'm sorry for your loss. It was the only thing worth saying. It was a long time ago. Oh, to be so young that a few years was considered a long time. I shook my head, then returned us to the current point. You needed that old hermit the same way your pack mates need you now. It's time to step up to the plate and help them grow together. But I'm not ready to take on that responsibility. The deer in the headlights look was what clinched it for me. That right there is what proves you're alpha material. If you don't want the role, then you're perfect for the job. Chapter 11. We gathered in the cafeteria, the space large and echoing with only 5 wolf campers scattered around the tables. 38% survival rate. I'd have to hope next year raised my average back up. Congratulations, I told the assembled campers. I've filed your paperwork. And you are officially a pack sanctioned and protected for the first year. Under shifter law. If you need me, you can come back here in 11 months and ask for assistance. But instead, I recommend you take your sugar mama and get the heck out of Dodge. Sugar mama? Becca was the first one to pick up on my altered patter. Of course she was. She'd heard me say the same words, minus those 2, for the last 10 years. Yeah. I let my eyes smile even though my mouth remained grim. You're fired. Go back to the human world if you want to, but I think you have pack mates who need you and all that hoarded cash, much more. Because Becca took home half the haul each year, but she never spent it. She just squirreled it away, waiting for her pack to materialize. A pack that I'd created for her. Better late than never. Now she wouldn't have to draw any more sad pictures in the dust. True to form, Nose and Matthew pressed up against her in immediate acceptance. Oliver and Aiden glanced at each other, then nodded their heads in assent. And their alpha? Tattoo Kid looked relieved, as if I'd lifted half the weight off his shoulders. Little did he know my bossy cousin would remove more like 2/3, which left Becca as the only one needing to be convinced of the new game plan. I expected eye daggers, literal punches maybe, but instead her bottom lip quivered. Tears welled up at the corners of her eyes. Don't hate me, Becca. I don't hate you, you idiot. She took a step forward and I braced myself. She had a mean right hook. Instead, she threw her arms around my neck and squeezed. I bent my knees so our bodies fit together better. She was so small and human. Could she survive in a werewolf pack? Don't second guess yourself. Becca released me as fast as she turned. Limpet. I should have figured something like this was coming. You're never cruel except when you know it will help. She was right, my combined strength and weakness. Expert manipulator. Time to finish what I'd begun. You are my pack no longer. The tethers twining out of me and into the nearby werewolves splintered. My stomach turned over. You now belong to Prince. The aforementioned shifter's tattoos glowed as the connections I'd held in on iron fists wove themselves more artfully around him. I'd taken the pack by brute force. He was granted the honor willingly. Their alpha, their leader, their mentor. Prince was wise in ways his pack needed. Even I had grown during the few short weeks we'd spent in wolf camp together. Because now I could admit that the packless hole in my stomach needed filling. And even though permanent bonds to other werewolves were beyond me at the moment, attaching myself to a human clearly was not. Becca was needed elsewhere. But a simple relationship of pet to master like the one Prince had indulged in? That sounded like something I could handle. Here and now. And in 11 months, maybe I'd be able to follow Becca's advice and turn wolf camp into something different. A recruiting ground to form my own family? A way of creating a different sort of pack? I shivered, flinching away from that possibility. I wasn't ready for it. Not today or tomorrow. But maybe I would be in 11 months. Prince, on the other hand, was ready now. He jerked his chin upwards, the only farewell I merited. Then he turned away to face his new pack members. Grab your stuff, sugar mama. We've got a territory to find. Unfortunately, my cousin never could take orders, and today was no exception. Her hand lifted as if she planned to grab me by the scruff of my neck and force her dream into a reality. She'd wanted me to be part of her future. But could she really turn down perfection when the scenario she'd hoped for was handed to her on a silver platter? Becca might not have a mate, but she'd be pack mother to 5 needy shifters. She'd have a den of her own. Plenty of wolves playing in the yard. Are you sure, Luke? I'm certain. When happiness comes knocking, you have to seize it. She raised her eyebrows. Oh yeah, she wasn't the only one that advice applied to. Live by that, my cousin demanded. Promise me. I promise, Becca. Then finally my cousin turned away. My last contact with my birth family. The only one I'd loved after my brother perished. My vision was watery as the last graduating class of wolf campers, all 6 of them, filed out of the cafeteria and out of my life. Want to see more of Luke? He reappears as a major secondary character in Moon Stalked, the tale of a wolf in hunting her cousin's stolen pelt. In contrast, Prince doesn't have a story of his own, but the flash fiction piece that follows mirrors what he must have experienced during his early life. Bloodling song. The ocean sipped against the sand, wet my paws and threatened to drag me down into the muck. This close to the breakers, the roar was endless, a white noise that lulled me into a muscle-loosening sense of quiet. I'd come here seeking an easy dinner, preferably a jellyfish, jiggly and salt, infused as I gulped it down my gullet. Instead, I was drawn to the deep bass undertone of the ocean. Padding closer, I raised my chin and held out, longing for something I couldn't quite put my toenail on. Wind whistled counterpoint. That much was audible once I turned my head to ease the tickling of long hairs inside the pockets of my ears. And as I did so, something else rose out of the background murmur. Another howl emerging from the west, the tones higher pitched than any I'd heard previously and so much better defined. Instinctively, I crept dunesward, left the calming vibration of waves for the windswept hills that separated beach from scrub thicket. My neck swiveled as I scanned for one of my pack mates. Or possibly a stray canine who had newly swum the strait that separated our secluded island from others to the north and south. Nothing. Sand stung my eyes and nostrils, so I slitted my lids and paced forward. Blindly. Scratched clawed feet into unruly hillside that worked against me as I scrambled upward, sending me not up but rather sliding down. Oh! Soft exhalation ended the melody, the loss so intense it pulled a whine from my lips. Why had the howler ceased singing? Had my approach come across as a threat? I lowered my body closer to the earth despite cactus spines scraping my belly. With my actions I promised I hadn't come to harm, only to hear. Only when I was certain the singer understood me did I blink open my eyes and peer up. The alien was strangely vertical, balancing precariously on two massive hind feet. Long waves of fur flowed off its head and trailed behind it. Its neck cocked once, then it returned to song. Visions of bird trills drifted behind my eyelids. The soft touch of spring. Mornings when fog turned blue sea to gray. The being sang of blood sparkling in the sunlight. Of a yearning I was only beginning to fully comprehend. Then, shimmering between nodding heads of sea oats, it fell forward and burst into fur form. Long snout, longer tail, scent so rich it pulled me closer. She was the being I'd come here to discover. The other I'd dreamed of but had never been able to find. Our eyes met. Tails wagged. Scents embraced each other. Then she leapt back vertical. Losing fur, losing claws, losing identity. And pulling me along with her. I staggered on bare feet, yelped as a sandburr burrowed between furless toe clefts. Behind her arched a rainbow, full of colors I'd only dreamed of. Before me she bared her teeth. Then together we sang. The protagonist of this short piece has no longer story, but the setting does. During my childhood, my family spent 1 week per year camping on Ocracoke Island in the Outer Banks of North Carolina. When I was a teen, my older sister tempted me to join her on a canoe trek across the water to an even more isolated island. The solitude of that place turned into this story. And now it's time to change gears and meet Fawn, whose story spans 3 novels. First, though, let's meet her when she's a little younger and a lot less secure. Tough as Nails. Author's note. Tough as Nails is set about a year before Shiftless begins and is told from the point of view of the protagonist of Half Wolf. But the story doesn't contain spoilers, so it can be read at any time. Chapter 1. He looks like Wolfie. My Lupin half was right. The stranger in front of us did resemble the handsome alpha who had rebuffed our advances 8 months prior. Both were broad-shouldered and held themselves with that not quite cocky stance that promised their inner wolves could easily protect us from all comers. Both had an awareness of their surroundings that put mine, even while four-legged, to shame. And both had smiles that seemed to change my usually mild-mannered wolf into a starving sex addict. Only one, however, was hanging around the meat processing plant where I'd taken to hunting for free meals. Yes, I know it sounds gross, but grabbing entrails out of the slop bucket seemed like a better choice than the way other teenage runaways made a living. Much safer too, as long as I kept my face averted so the plant employees never caught a glimpse of my yellow Lupin eyes. So far both men seemed to have fallen for the notion that I was just a harmless stray. Not so with this stranger. But when I made my move, I had yet to notice the uninvited company. Instead I listened until the pair of employees chatted their way toward an old pickup truck heading out to lunch. Then the crunch of tires on gravel and the growling from my stomach pushed me toward stupidity. I didn't even look both ways before stepping out into the open parking lot, only to have my gaze met and held by this enticing alpha. "They're gone," he said in a conversational tone, knowing my wolf ears could easily pick up the sound even from 30 feet away. "You can come out now." "He looks kind," my wolf whispered, and through her eyes he certainly did look kind. Too bad my wolf had all the street smarts of an autistic princess. Before us the alpha squatted down, reducing what had seemed like a menacing height even to my intrigued Lupin half. She whimpered as the stranger pulled the clincher out of his pocket. A Big Mac all wrapped up in shiny paper, the rich aroma wriggling up through the folds to drift into our nostrils. My weak wolf wasn't a top-notch scent hound, but she sure as heck could smell that. My animal half took a step forward without permission, and I yanked from deep inside her fur to shift back into human form. Better to deal with this naked than at the whim of a wolf who'd never dream of using her claws. Proving my point, the canine in question didn't snap at my snark, having already tucked her tail between her legs and disappeared deep into the recesses of our shared body. I emerged from fur bent over and gasping from the effort, and as I straightened I was startled to find myself nearly eye to eye with the stranger. How did he get so close so fast? The alpha must have leapt toward me. During the seconds required to complete my transformation, the seconds when I was completely vulnerable, I shivered. Good thing I'm a fast shifter despite my useless wolf. I'd seen other werewolves bristle when subtly crowded as this stranger was doing to me now, but my own animal half remained silent and peaceful, so I was the only one noticing how the alpha's eyes drifted hungrily across my unclad body, making me clench my teeth in annoyance. Yep, my earlier positive assessment of this stranger had definitely been clouded by the wolf's desires. I didn't like my uninvited companion nearly so much as my inner animal had. My immediate urge was to cover my bare breasts and crotch, but I wasn't willing to let the stranger win this round of intimidation, even though his wolf could have beaten mine at arm wrestling, with both hands tied behind his back. Not so much an assessment of his strength as of my wolf's weakness. Worthless wolf aside, my human brain had learned to bluff like nobody's business. It was a necessary trait if I didn't want to get run over by every single shifter I met. So, rather than shrinking into myself, I instead straightened and glared up at the alpha, forcing him to take a step backwards, using the weight of my eyes alone. Hey now, no need to get defensive, the stranger said, or rather growled. His canines had subtly lengthened, and I thought for a moment that his light brown eyes were turning a lupin amber. But then the predatory expression faded so quickly that I figured I must have imagined it, and his face broke out into what appeared to be a self-deprecating grin. I was just bringing you some lunch, he said, jerking his chin toward the hamburger that still sat on the ground between us. No longer aggressive, the alpha's current photo could have been featured in a psychology textbook under the heading non-threatening behavior. So even though I knew it was a stupid move, I crouched and nabbed the offered food, ripping open the box with trembling fingers. Goat guts will only take you so far, and it had been months since I'd tasted anything as good as this. Big Mac looked. Still, I kept my attention trained on the alpha, who stood carefully at ease, his hands hanging loosely at his sides. Thanks, I mumbled, feeling like a clueless kid instead of like the 19-year-old near-adult I actually was. I hadn't realized I was this close to animal mode starvation, so I forced myself to pause before I took my first bite. Trying to regain both humanity and adulthood, I tore the burger in two and held out one portion to my benefactor. Here you have half. No, the word was almost a bark, and I looked across the space between us quizzically. What was this dude's problem? Then I glanced down at the two burger portions cradled in my hands. The top of the bun had slipped partially off one patty, exposing a white powder liberally sprinkled atop the exposed meat. A white powder that didn't look at all like salt. He's trying to drug me. Now I was glad my wolf was asleep, because she, like most animals, lacked a poker face. My human self, on the other hand, was a prime bluffer. So I feigned nonchalance and pretended to take a bite, using the stolen instant to rewind through the preceding moments in my mind. Had the packaging on my gift been as well latched as the offerings I'd received during past fast food experiences? No, the cardboard notch had been slightly torn, as if the box had been opened and then reclosed after leaving the restaurant. He looks like Wolfie. He won't hurt us, my wolf whispered. But I'd learned the hard way that she was the world's worst judge of character. And after all, hadn't Wolfie hurt us when I admitted my crush and he broke my heart? Sure, my former pack leader had tried to present his words in as kind a manner as possible, and I'd been the one to take the rebuff as an invitation to turn my back on our shared home. Still, it was a proven fact that my track record at reading the intentions of alpha werewolves was sorely lacking. So I mentally bound my wolf's will in chains so she wouldn't bother me, and I flung the untouched burger into the stranger's face. Then I donned fur and I. Chapter 2. The stranger was nothing if not tenacious. My paws bled and my tender nose was coated in scratches by the time I tore through half a dozen briar patches and shook him off our trail. And even after I was pretty sure he'd fallen behind and been snookered by the oldest trick in the book, that wading through creek standby, I still forced myself to run flat out for another hour just to be on the safe side. I didn't want to see the backstabbing stranger's face ever again. Hungry, my wolf murmured from deep inside our shared body, breaking me out of the rhythm of my footsteps. She was like a 2-year-old sometimes, quick to tell me what she needed but slow to help figure out the steps required to get there. Still I paused and raised our shared nose to the breeze, knowing there was little chance we'd smell anything edible as deep as we were in the woods. We'd left roads and humanity behind hours earlier, so there was zero chance of my usual backup plan for dinner, dumpster diving. Of course, being a wolf and all, the forest should have been the perfect spot to find a meal. Unfortunately, my lupin half was the world's worst hunter. And when my human brain took charge of our furred form, the layer of fog between will and body always made us miss our pounces. I was ashamed to admit that, at an age when most shifters had brought down deer all on their lonesome, I'd never so much as captured a mouse. Some werewolf I am. But the aroma filling the air now wouldn't require any pouncing. Strawberries. Their sweet/tart aroma coating my tongue so strongly I didn't know how I'd missed it before. Must be the layer of fog, combined with a lupin half who was barely strong enough to get out of bed in the morning. It was hard to grumble about my subpar wolf though when I followed the fruity scent and stepped out of the trees into a vast valley completely coated with strawberry plants. Wow, the view looked so much like paradise that I shook my head, convinced that the adrenaline, the wrong body fog, and the number of hours since I'd last eaten had combined to produce a hallucination. So it sure seems like a tasty one. And it also seemed like a hallucination more fitted to my human form, because, while a wolf's stomach could handle fruit, I'd pick the berries more easily with hominid fingers and would enjoy their flavor more with a human tongue. So I leapt upward onto 2 legs, steadying myself with one hand against the trunk of a nearby tree. I almost expected the fields of fruit to disappear as the lupin fog receded, but instead the strawberries remained, and a clothesline at the edge of the field even offered clean clothes to shield my nakedness. Too good to be true. I'd like to say I was talking to my wolf, but I'd actually gotten into the habit of just mumbling thoughts aloud since leaving Wolfie's clan. The sound of my own voice, I'd found, took some of the sting out of being packless and alone in the world. And now my words reminded me to sniff at the air again, searching for human scents amid the warm, tantalizing aroma of berries ripening in the sunlight. Too bad my nose was even more hopeless in human form than when four-legged. Smelled nothing and resolved to simply be careful as I ate. Skirting the edge of the trees, I looked in all directions before darting toward the clothesline, and even though I knew that whacking 1 foot off my height would have no effect on shielding me from view, I still found that I was running hunched over, my eyes on the ground. If we can't see them, they can't see us, my wolf promised. Ah yes, lupin logic. Just what I needed to get out of this mess with skin intact. Still, my wolf and I together had managed to achieve our goal. A long line of women's clothing stretched out before us, and I tested a piece of fabric between forefinger and thumb. The underwear was dry and warmly aromatic with the scent of fresh air and laundry soap. My hand settled on a clothespin, and then a voice rang out from the other side of the line. But Chapter 3. Not that one, the woman said. I didn't see how I could have missed her earlier since she was only 10 feet away from me, albeit on the other side of the fabric-covered line. First glance she seemed harmless, reclining on a lounge chair outside a little building's back door. But a second glance proved that her relaxed posture was deceptive. Instead, the 40-ish woman looked tough as nails, and not just because her hair was cut short and her skin was roughened from spending many hours under the sun. No, there was something about the set of her shoulders that exuded power and strength. But despite the tough persona, her voice didn't seem angry. If anything, the woman appeared amused to find a naked stranger walking out of the woods with clear intents upon her clean underwear. That belongs to my mate, the laundry's owner continued. And it would confuse me to no end to see you wearing it. She pointed lazily to less frilly panties further down the line that, I had to admit, suited my tastes much better. Those pairs are mine, and you're welcome to them. The jeans should fit you too, and, that navy tank top. I was lightheaded from hunger and fear, and my brain yelled at me to bolt. But instead I found myself following her instructions in a daze. All right, she'd met my eyes, and my wolf had been awake enough to force us both to roll over and do a dominant being's bidding at a glance. Slapping down the annoying animal, I took another gander at my supposed benefactor. It was obvious that, despite her easygoing manner, this woman was dangerous. After all, even if my subpar nose and the forced behavior hadn't clued me in, the term mate would have made the truth obvious. I was nabbing clothes from another shifter, and one whose wolf predictably was miles stronger than my own. Let's see how you look, she said after I'd pulled on the indicated garments. I didn't think I could make it to the tree line before she shifted and pulled me down, so I obediently stepped around the pole to stand before her. I'd meant to be wary, but instead had the surreal notion that I was coming out of a dressing room to get a girlfriend's advice on an intended purchase. The sudden impulse, barely restrained, to twirl in a circle and show off all sides, made me cringe. Yep, this is definitely a hallucination. Not bad, the woman said. I'm Quetzali, by the way. And you're starving. It was true. I'd lost at least 20 pounds since hightailing it away from Wolfie's pack, and my stomach now seemed to be perpetually stuck to the inside of my rib cage. But after my experience with the Big Mac, I wasn't about to accept food offerings from a stranger. The berries were another matter, since even my paranoid human brain couldn't believe that anyone would go to the effort of drugging such a vast reserve of found fruit. Do you think I could? I pointed vaguely in front of us, although now that I was closer I saw that the remaining fruits were rotting atop a plastic mulch. The crop was clearly past its prime, only damaged berries remaining at the tail end of the harvest season. Not that I would mind putting even a so-so fruit in my belly at this point. The boss man won't care, Quetzali said easily. Picking season's over and we're moving on tomorrow, but you'll make yourself sick eating spoiled strawberries on an empty stomach. Our gazes locked for a moment as we sized each other up. To a human eye, Quetzali seemed to be halfway asleep as she lounged beneath a broad straw hat that covered most of her head. But I'd been around shifters all my life and knew that her muscles were tensed and ready for action. If her mate was present, she'd have already sent me on my way with a shotgun blast aimed over my head. At least I hoped the blast would have been pointed at the sky. Hunching my shoulders, I did my best to reduce my height so I'd look less imposing. But who was I kidding? My body was just skin and bones now, and Quetzali could have knocked me over with a feather. I was the one who should be taking to my heels and getting as far away from this strange shifter as possible. One side of Quetzali's mouth quirked upwards into a sardonic smile. I've got canned soup inside, she said in what would have resembled a motherly expression of concern if my companion hadn't sported a buzz cut and a nose piercing. That's probably about all your stomach will handle without upchucking all over my flower beds. There were no flower beds, and as I peered around the barren yard, it finally occurred to me that Quetzali and her partner were migrant laborers, here to pick the strawberries, then gone again when the season ended. She had no territory to protect, and my muscles relaxed a trifle. Still, when the other woman swung her legs over the side of the recliner, I stumbled 10 feet in the opposite direction before my brain could tell my feet to stop. H&H. The sound emerging from behind my back resembled the snort of a quizzical wolf, and I couldn't resist looking over my shoulder to see if fangs and claws were heading in my direction. Instead, Quetzali was still two-legged. In fact, she turned away to walk in the other direction rather than toward either me or the house. I'm heading over to the creek for a few minutes, she said calmly, as if speaking to a starving stray about to bolt. Who was I kidding? She pretty much was speaking to a starving stray about to bolt. You can make your soup then. Come outside to eat it where you can watch all exits. The woman paused, then finished. I'm not gonna hurt you, kid. Then Quetzali turned her back on me and made her way out of sight. Chapter 4. So what are you running from? I nearly dropped the spoon when Quetzali snuck up behind me, but there was still nourishment to be gleaned from its metal surface, so I was careful to snatch the utensil before it hit the ground. Gourmet meal this was not, but I still wasn't willing to spill a drop. Not after those 20 nerve-wracking seconds spent hunting soup, spoon, and can opener, the process taking twice as long as it should have, since my gaze remained trained on the door the entire time. Then, rather than heeding my find, I'd carried the congealed glob of salty goo outside to eat where I could scan the horizon for predators. Despite all that effort, and the fact that cold, condensed soup is pretty darn disgusting, I'd gotten so lost in the enjoyment of filling my belly that I hadn't even noticed when my hostess returned. Now I jumped to my feet at the same time Quetzali rolled her eyes and slumped back into the recliner. Look, kid. Fooin'. I wasn't sure why I told her my name. It wasn't like I was still that fresh-faced kid who'd greeted every new shifter with a handshake and a smile. During my early days of trying to carve out a place for myself in the cold, hard world. Even at that time, my naive younger self had never offered up any identifying information to strangers. Not my name, not my outpack status, not the fact that I was only part shifter and boasted the world's most half-assed wolf. And I quickly became glad of those evasions when sadistic drifters entered my radar. No, this afternoon's alpha hadn't been my first close call, which was why I'd taken to hiding in the woods and hunting at the slaughterhouse rather than continuing to look for a pack worth calling my own. We should just go home to Wolfie, my lupin conscience muttered. And for once she was right. Our former leader had cobbled together a clan of shifters who wouldn't have fit into any other pack, and they were clearly the only werewolves willing to welcome a halfie like me into their midst. But I refused to trot home with my tail between my legs. No, I'd either find another pack or I'd come up with a way to return as an asset rather than as a hindrance. Look, Foan, Quetzali corrected herself, breaking into my thoughts. I've got a mate to look out for. She's sugar and spice and everything nice. The other shifter waved her hand in the air as if making fun of this absent better half. But I could tell from the glint in her eye that she adored her mate. I need to know what kind of trouble's following in your footsteps. I looked down at the feet in question, noticing for the first time that I'd tracked smears of blood across the wooden porch. Even though I'd never given out my name before now, my scent trail was likely to lead the slaughterhouse stranger to my door sooner rather than later. The can of soup was empty and I set it down gently on the dirt as I rose to my feet. I felt like an octogenarian, my muscles having solidified into one continuous ache. So much for relaxing in the seeming safety of the strawberry field. I should go. Quetzali rolled her eyes. That's not what I'm saying, kid. Apparently, knowing my name made no difference in how she saw me. What I'm saying is knowledge is power. So, Chapter 5. I told her everything. I started with the alpha who tried to drug me. Danger that Quetzali brushed off with a roll of her expressive eyes. She seemed confident that she could handle the drifter dubbed Big Mac. Then, when my hostess brought out a second serving of soup, this one watered down and heated up on the stove while I waited outside, I spewed forth the long tale of my own stupidity. How I'd left a perfect found family through childish mortification when my advances had been rejected by the pack leader. How I yearned every day to return home and how I knew I'd be welcomed with open arms. But my pride kept me wandering in outpack territory. How I was still in love with an alpha 11 years my senior who had looked at me with kind, brotherly eyes as I tried to pull his head down for a kiss. You're one of my best friends, he told me, but you're not my mate. Wolfie evidently thought I was a kid with a crush, and he'd been painfully careful not to give me the wrong impression of his own feelings in the days that followed. Yes, he'd been so careful that I'd had to leave in order to avoid the pity that seemed to perpetually drift in the depths of his beautiful eyes. He's right, you know, Quetzali said when my words finally wound down. You're not in love with him. He didn't say that, I shot back. He said he wasn't in love with me. There's a difference. A kinder woman would have patted me on the back and said, "Oh, you poor dear. Of course you're right." But I found Quetzali's eye roll more heartening. "It's what he meant," she countered. "But whatever. You have to learn these things on your own. It's a tough road to hoe being a strong woman shifter, and I'm afraid there aren't any shortcuts to get where you're going." Now I was the one tempted to roll my eyes. A strong woman shifter? Quetzali met that description for sure. Being a lesbian werewolf wasn't going to fly in 99% of the packs out there. No wonder she and her mate were wandering alone in the human world. I knew firsthand how hard outpack life could be, and the fact Quetzali was alive at all was a testament to her spunk. But I wasn't any kind of strong shifter. Case in point, my own wolf was so quiescent that I hadn't heard a peep out of her this entire time. She should have been hovering beneath my skin as I listened for intruders in the kitchen. But instead she'd easily relinquished control to my human brain as soon as we'd shed our fur. The idea that suffering from a hearty bout of unrequited love was going to toughen me up seemed laughable. I opened my mouth to tell Quetzali as much, but then a woman who could only be her mate came trotting out of the forest naked, her own wolf clearly stifled only seconds before. "There's a strange alpha heading this way," she called toward us. And he doesn't smell good. Chapter 6. I found myself in charge of yanking clothes off the line while Quetzali and her partner stuffed their ancient sedan with the few items of value they'd unpacked during their stay in Strawberry Valley. What do you mean he doesn't smell good? The former asked as she passed by, with a cardboard box of kitchen staples hefted on one shoulder. I'd felt bad for gulping down so much of her soup when her cupboards were nearly bare, but now I was glad there was less to pack. The sooner their possessions were stashed away, the sooner these two could make tracks out of here. At least, then I wouldn't be responsible for bringing down doom on anyone but myself. Because while I'd been able to laugh about Big Mac, when Quetzali had been looking all tough and strong beside me, I felt much less hopeful now. Not with the alpha breathing down our necks and causing my hostess to hover protectively around her sugar and spice mate. Perhaps I should try to lead the alpha away? But one glance at Quetzali, working as fast as she could to stuff her box into the back seat, changed my mind. No, I'd see this out and make sure the two women were safely on the road before the stranger arrived. He smelled, I don't know, not quite in his right mind, Quetzali's mate answered. Galena was the same age as her partner, but softer and more feminine. She'd given me a quick hug after our brief introduction. I found myself thinking that it was a good thing Galena had found a tough woman shifter to team up with, because otherwise she would have been trampled by the patriarchal, overbearing males who made up the average werewolf pack. Trampled just like I would be when these two drove off and left me behind. My heart rate sped up and I forced myself to breathe instead of gasp. But he's on foot, right? Quetzali prodded. So he can't follow our car. Yeah, and I think that's everything. Galena slammed the trunk shut and headed toward the driver's seat. This is it. My muscles tensed, ready to run as soon as the pair was safely out of sight. But I forced myself to wait. The honor Wolfie had instilled in me, requiring that I see their taillights in the distance before I took to my heels. But they were taking forever to get in the car, and the alpha had to be drawing closer by the second. Why weren't my hostesses gone yet? Cocking my head to one side, I noted that both women were now looking at me quizzically. In response, my eyes flicked over the contents of the packed vehicle. I'd already stowed the full laundry basket in the back seat, so what could they be waiting for? Spreading my hands out questioningly, I asked more than said, I'm sorry. In what seemed to be her habitual response to my stupidity, Quetzali rolled her eyes. We're waiting for you to get in the car, she said, enunciating clearly. But where are you going? Not that it mattered. If I was invited, I would totally hop this ride away from Big Mac. Suiting actions to thoughts, I slipped into the 18 inches of empty space in the back seat and rooted around for my seatbelt. Well, I guess that's up to you, Quetzali answered as she slammed her own door shut. Personally, I like the sound of this pack you told me about. Think any alpha would be grateful if an absent member showed up bringing along such strong and beautiful women as Galena and myself. Via the rearview mirror, I could see Galena shooting her mate a quick, surprised glance. She'd missed out on story time and was clearly unsure of the idea of joining a shifter clan sight unseen. And yet, the gentler woman was willing to trust her mate's judgment. Not because of some submissive shifter bullshit either. No, Galena trusted Quetzali to have her back at all times, and clearly Quetzali trusted her mate not to make a ruckus about the lightning-fast decision either. So after only a second of thought, Galena smiled at her mate and then met my eyes in the rearview mirror. We'd pulled up to where the gravel drive merged with a highway, and I could tell from the road signs in the distance that we had a choice before us: turn right toward Wolfie's pack or left back into the unknown. Which way? She asked. The real question was, could I rejoin my old clan without following their pack leader around like a lovesick puppy dog? Abruptly, I realized that the answer was a resounding yes, because Quetzali had nailed my feelings for Wolfie perfectly. Sure, my wolf thought our previous alpha could protect us from all comers, and she was probably right. And we also agreed that he was smoking hot. That one was a definite yes. And yet, the bond that seemed to tether Galena and Quetzali together was distinctly lacking in Wolfie's and my relationship, on my end as well as on his, which meant that I wasn't in love with my former pack leader. I was simply suffering from a girlhood crush, just as his pitying eyes had told me, and just as the straight shooter Quetzali had confirmed. In other words, it was high time to stop running away from my weaknesses so I could start running toward my strengths. The realization burst through my mind in the blink of an eye, but the delay was still long enough to allow the tenacious alpha to emerge into view behind us. He was galloping flat out, and I knew I had mere seconds before he'd be pounding on the hood of our car in human form. Quetzali was equally aware of the impending danger, but she'd chosen to ignore Big Mac rather than pushing me into a decision I wasn't yet ready to make. Only I was ready to choose the course of Quetzali's and Galena's futures, and of my own as well. Take a right, I answered firmly, leading us back toward the pack that I knew would welcome us all like long-lost friends. The relief I felt proved that I'd made the right decision, and as the car picked up speed, I resolved to incorporate Quetzali's wisdom into other parts of my life as well. My wolf might be weak, but my human half could surely learn to make up for her shortcomings. In fact, if I put my mind to it, someday I might become as strong as the unique shifter riding in front of me. Someday, I resolved, I too will be as tough as nails. Fawn's adventure continues in Half Wolf, which you can download for free in the Shifter Origins box set, or keep reading if you'd like to visit with some dragon shifters instead of wolves. Biological clock. I was selling clocks door to door when the vines appeared out of nowhere, rolling down the street like a crowd of kindergartners streaming out of school. After the final bell tolls, I've lost my mind, I thought, squinching eyes shut and smoothing down my pencil skirt. Perhaps it was hitting 40 while lacking all potential reproductive outlets, but everything had started looking like babies lately, so when I opened my eyes, I wasn't surprised to see that something else had materialized in front of the approaching tide of green. Yep, that really was an egg approximately the size of my overweight tomcat. I took a step closer, ignoring the screams that emanated from the other end of the block. A vine crept up the closest telephone pole, ripped wires free to spark against the ground. I jumped but stood my ground, staring fixedly at the tiny hole in the side of the golden orb. A beak pushed flakes of metallic shell aside one by one until a line of darkness nearly encircled the blunt end of the egg. Then a beady eye peered out at me, watery with effort and hope. My gut cramped with the realization that this was my baby. Sure so. There were scales covering that emerging snout, claws on the tiny feet, scrabbling against the opening, and wings tucked tight against the being's sodden back. But species aside, I was cradling the infant in my arms before I fully realized what was happening. I was cupping it against my breast, not caring in the least that birth goo was ruining the breast of my favorite blouse. I expected the dragon to struggle. After all, it was a wild animal. Or a wild something. But there was intelligence in the tilt of its head, and as its chilled limbs warmed against mine, I could have sworn an emotion passed between us. Understanding, fellowship, love. Then fire streaked past my neck, singeing a vine that had crept upward while I was otherwise occupied. 10 more seconds and that plant would have strangled both me and my baby alive. They were everywhere, covering the pavement, latching into my pantyhose, standing up under their own volition and swaying like cobras as they attempted to reach the dragon. I was no botanist, but I could clearly identify mean plants, ugly plants, and homicidal plants at a glance. Worse, every single one of those suckers wanted my baby dead. How about a little more flame? I coaxed the dragonet, but safe in my embrace, it had already started snoring. An overgrown rosebush took advantage of my distraction to reach for my wristwatch. I was almost out of time. Wait a minute. The floral invaders weren't growing randomly. They were fixating on electricity. Ignoring the grasping tendrils, I knelt and opened the case in which I kept my wares. Simple clocks, fancy clocks. There we go. Pulling out the device parents love to hate, I powered it up. Flashing lights and whirling colors promised to teach infants the wonders of clockwork. At best I could tell, it mostly mesmerized the young and terrified the old. Like babies, the vines were stupefied. Taking advantage of their distraction, I cupped my baby closer to my chest. Then, leaving the destruction behind us, I ran. Mop magic. I couldn't get down. Below me, the green stalked up the side of the eyrie, the voracious plants not quite able to reach the level where I lived and worked. Releasing my mop, I rested for a moment against the plate glass window, tilting my head so I could peer down into the sea of vines. Above, the Aries master soared on thermals, dancing and playing in the first warm day of spring. The dragon shifters were relentlessly kind to the unwinged, providing food, shelter, the only home I'd ever known. But they couldn't give me what I really wanted, the ability to fly. Daydreaming again? Samantha's snide voice cut into my reverie and I flinched away from the blow I knew was coming. As expected, her hand struck out. But this time it only knocked my mop free to clatter against the damp floor tiles. The dragon lords will toss you out into the green if you don't start pulling your weight, my nemesis huffed. She flicked long blonde tresses back over one shoulder, standing with hip angled out so her curvaceous body was perfectly positioned to catch the eye of the dragon still frolicking on the other side of the glass. Our dragon lords were young males, not much older than Samantha and myself. No wonder they swooped in closer to take a look at the display offered for their enjoyment. I could all but see them drool. But I didn't care, too taken with the glory of their flight. One hovered just beyond the window, sun glinting off his tightly stretched wings. I could almost feel the gust of air against my face as he beat upward in my stomach, dipped in joyous sympathy. Well, Samantha demanded without even glancing back. The balcony on the opposite side of the building is full of filth. You'll feel right at home there. When my feet remained frozen to the spot, she wasted one precious flirting moment to cast a heated glare over one shoulder. Go. Stooping to collect my mop, I obeyed. Unlike the dragons outside, Samantha wasn't my boss. But she definitely knew how to make my life unpleasant. Now, as always, I chose to give her a very wide berth. At least out on the far balcony, I could feel the breeze flicking through my hair, even if I no longer saw the dragons spiraling through the sky. Smiling, I leaned out to scrub at a cobweb Samantha was sure to chide me for if left untouched. Then, foot slipping, the mop wedged into a crack. Unexpected resistance tipped me off balance, twisted me around the fulcrum. Screaming, I fell. Air whooshed past, drying wide eyes and cooling grasping arms. The hungry plants would soon grab me, consume me. Or perhaps they'd miss and I'd shatter on leftover city pavement 200 feet below. Then frantic fingers found plummeting mop handle. Clutched, clung. The air abruptly softened. Up, it asked. Nodding, I flew. If you want more dragons and witches, Incendiary Magic is currently free to download in the Shifter Origins box set. Or keep reading for a semi-autobiographical short story written when I was first journeying into the world of urban fantasy. Salamander in the